there was an incident that you were referring to.
Yeah,
Uh,
there's the Prairie Land trial. There was a
yeah, you
protest.
referred to
Yeah.
that, and I hadn't followed that. So maybe when we record or when maybe you could just give us, I don't know, a,
Yeah.
a, a minute on
Is
what that is and
it's
what.
the centerpiece of the Trump administration's Antifa prosecution.
Okay.
So when we do, and we'll do it in just a second. Somebody can, Patrick, maybe you can just sort of, because I have a space at the beginning. Scott will welcome you at the top, and then both Patrick and Harold. I didn't draft questions. Well, I think I get a basic question, but Patrick, maybe you can feed
Yeah,
him
I'll
that.
ask a question.
But
So just
You can tell how regimented we are in our recording here, Scott.
You should see it with me and Bob. We get on 10 minutes before the guests get on and sort it out. So
You do it 10 minutes ahead?
10 minutes.
Wow.
Whoa,
15
that's
maybe.
professional. Welcome to the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, everybody, where we bring you highlights from the Labor Radio Podcast Network, where the working people speak. This week, we're joined by a very special guest co-host, Scott Parkin, who co-hosts Green and Red Podcast. Scott, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
It is so great to be here. I'm very excited to be talking with y'all and excited to be part of the Labor Podcast Network too.
Well, God knows we love having your show, the Green and Red Podcast, as a part of the network, Scott. Let me ask, how did the Green and Red Podcast come into being? Because you and your partner Bob, you've been doing this for a while, right?
Yeah, we just had our sixth anniversary of the Green and Red Podcast, but Bob and I have been friends for 26 years. I started out as Bob's grad student. He was a professor of history at the University of Houston, and we became friends. We were co-organizers for a long time in Houston around anti-globalization, anti-war uh, uh, issues in the early 2000s. And then sort of late 2010s, we were like, oh, we should start a podcast. We would just talk about the stuff that we talk about on the podcast. And we're like, we should start a podcast, and saw that there was like the technology was a lot easier than it might have been a few years before. And we had a lot of connections with different guests, Bob from the academic world, me from the activist world, and just launched it and did it.
At 6 years old, that makes you one of our more senior podcasts. And so I'm just curious about what's the key to keeping a podcast going, for years.
One, I would say that the state of the world is one thing that has really driven us. Two, I would say that we've been pretty flexible in our work lives. I work remotely for a nonprofit, and Bob is a professor, and now he's a retired professor. And so having the time and capacity to sort of like put our head around these things. And one other thing I didn't actually say is that Bob actually had a radio show on Pacifica Radio for a long time in the 2000s. And so he was very experienced at media and doing long form interview. And so that also brought a lot into it. I would say I've developed more in that, but we were pretty strong on that.
tell us a bit about how your show connects environmental and labor struggles at the moment.
Part of it is that one of the things that we wanted to do with this podcast is really we lift up people's history and we lift up politics, but then we also wanted to lift up organizing and direct action. And so we talk a lot about organizing, and we bring a lot of organizers on. Sometimes we bring people from the labor world. Sometimes bring people from the environmental world. And then we're very dedicated into breaking down silos between, environmental struggle and labor struggle. And so we often will talk to environmentalists about labor and labor within their movement. And then we also often bring up, environmental and climate questions for our labor guests.
Organizing is a theme of the shows that we're featuring in this week. We're going to hear from Green and Red. I have one question, though. You referenced in the segment that we're going to listen to the Prairie Land trial, and this isn't
Mhm.
something that we featured on the weekly. Can you give us a short primer for listeners who haven't followed this episode?
So Prairie Land is an ICE detention center in North Texas, just north of Fort Worth. There was a noise demo protest there on July 4th last year. which ended in a exchange of gunfire between a local police officer and one of the people who were there at the protest. Everyone who was at the protest was arrested and has been gotten serious was charged with federal material aid to terrorism charges. The people didn't even really know each other. There's a lot more detail to that, which comes out in the episode and other episodes we've done. But the trial just happened last month. All the 9 people who were up on the federal charges were convicted, all of them for material aid to terrorism, and then one of them, who was the person who exchanged gunfire, um, was also convicted of attempted murder of a police officer. And so this has become the centerpiece of the Trump administration's "we need to get Antifa." They talk often about the North Texas Antifa cell, and that was this trial. But as the Trump administration uses Antifa as this new boogeyman to go after really anyone in the progressive left, this trial has been the sort of like centerpiece of what they claim to be evidence of why all Antifa is bad and all people on the progressive left are bad.
It is utterly ridiculous. I mean, they're trying to create this boogeyman out of a non-organization, which
Right.
is just part and parcel of how ridiculous the world is. But as Patrick said, we are going to focus on organizing this week, and we're going to talk about exactly what Scott just brought up on the Green and Red podcast.
There's supposed to be this division between the FBI and CIA, between domestic and State Department. They do all the really terrible stuff against the foreigners overseas, but they're supposed to be restricted at home. That line is being blurred and erased.
And on Union Strong from the New York State AFL-CIO, after organizing comes negotiating for a contract. And one New York newspaper's workers have been trying to organize a contract for almost 2 decades.
We have one reporter who's been there for probably 20 years who needs a car. Well, he can't afford a car, so he's taking the bus every day.
On the Heartland Labor Forum, transit riders in Kansas City are organizing for power and a better bus system.
This is not a new idea. Transit riders have been unionizing for decades. Using people power to demand freedom of mobility is definitely not a new idea.
And then from the union bug, a deep dive into how workers can build their own unions from the ground up.
Yo, our forebears, they have figured out some stuff real good. Like, this is validated stuff, right? Doesn't mean you could just take it off the shelf and use it, but you need to at least pick it up off the shelf and consider whether it inspires you.
The LaborStart podcast is examining the growing danger of extreme heat on workers. And this could be workers just about anywhere in the world, and how unions can make workplaces safer.
But they looked at garment workers as well. And what they found was that workers in a union spent 50% less time in hot conditions. Or as I say, the stronger the union, the cooler the workplace.
And on organizing for a change, a conversation on why real organizing isn't a checklist, it's creativity and shared power.
If you want to build power, you need to cede control. And I think it's really important to understand anything that's tightly controlled from the center is never going to allow the space for the creativity from which new ideas and new models and new change comes.
All right, we are going to start with the Green and Red podcast. Scott was talking about this. Journalist Will Potter is going to be talking about the increasing criminalization of protest, which, Scott, it occurs to me, like all of us, I go to a lot of demonstrations, and, here in DC, there is always somebody who's not really with us. They're just there to mess around.
Yeah, I mean, there's a long history of that in the U.S. That's some of what Will talks about. That's also what Will has written about agent provocateurs or whatever. And it also shouldn't be something that scares people away from protests. We need more people in the street. it's when there's smaller demos and that sort of thing happens, it's hard not to get a lot of attention on it. But when you have more people, like what we've seen at the No Kings protests, or what we'll be seeing on May Day, I think that's the real power, and that's where we'll be. And that's the power of organizing, and that's the power of action, and that's where we're really going to be challenging this administration and everyone else who's responsible for all the different injustices that we see in the world right now.
Welcome to the Silky Smooth Sounds of Green and Red podcast. This is Scott Parkin in Berkeley, California. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko in Niles, Ohio.
And today we are rejoined by our friend and comrade, Will Potter, who is an award-winning investigative journalist and author whose work has focused on social justice movements and attacks on civil rights post 9/11. He is the author of Green is the New Red, an insider's account of a social movement under siege. And then his latest book is Little Red Barns, Hiding the Truth from Farm to Fable. So welcome back to the Green and Red podcast, Will. It's always great to have you here.
Me. Yeah, it's great to see you guys. I appreciate it very much.
Yeah. Maybe just starting on the current events, is we're seeing states have passed anti-protest legislation. We've talked with you about that, and increasing militarization of police. We're actually seeing activism turn into terrorism, most notably recently with the Prairie Land decision. We've done a couple of shows on it, including with the Prairie Land Defense Committee. And then I see that you've been putting some stuff out on it. Maybe we could start off with you talking a little bit about, like, how do you see this, where this political moment is now, particularly in the wake of what's happened at Prairie Land?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's the question of the hour, and a really big one. In short, I would say it's what we've talked about over the years so many times in continuance, this ever-expanding web of labeling dissent and protest as terrorism. But now it's accelerating in really dangerous ways. We'll talk about the Prairie Land case, but in general, if I'm sure all of your listeners are already aware, but this prioritization of anti-fascists and Antifa, the terrorist threat, is really now being pushed heavily by the administration, both rhetorically and within things like the national security memo that came out, fusion centers, and even a new international conference that's being organized for this summer, where the Trump administration is hoping to gather counterterrorism officials from multiple countries to talk about this terrorism threat. So everything, the writing has been on the wall for quite some time, but they're accelerating that effort to go after anti-fascists and anti-government protesters as terrorists, in the same way they've been going after environmentalists, civil rights activists, Muslim community, and so many others we've seen over the decades.
Something like the Prairie Land verdict, which we'll get to, but that involved actions. We'll just leave it at that, whether obviously you and I don't, the three of us don't believe that there were terrorist actions. But we're also seeing stuff like social media postings, right? And a grand jury is being asked to give away the anonymity of Reddit users. And that's the kind of stuff that seems different to me as somebody who studied it academically. Have you seen anything like that before? That's a big new step, isn't it?
It is. So I see it in a couple ways. One, it's essentially making that argument that all of this is a conspiracy, which is a tactic we've seen governments use well over 100 years, right? It goes back to the first Red Scare, second Red Scare, going after anti-war activists, Black liberation activists. This conspiracy has been used to wrap up in periods of heavy repression like this, wider and wider groups of people. But that's not necessarily new, but I think you're right that the way it's being applied in this digital era in particular, it feels like a shift right now. One of the things that stood out to me on that front is when the Trump administration is asking for increased funding now for a new, basically enhanced fusion centers that are bringing together all these counterterrorism resources to go after anti-fascists. Their description and the language of why that's necessary focus really heavily on media and social media. This is an ideological war, and the way that they're ramping up attacks on public communication and private communication, it's really troubling right now.
Just a quick follow-up. Because in the past, when people have said they're coming after me, I would say, nah, you're safe. Like I've said that about myself. I'm a nobody cares. I'm not sure that's true anymore, is it?
With the amount of intelligence resources and surveillance power, I think it's safe to say, no, I don't think that's true anymore. I would do the same thing because it never sat well with me how sometimes that could be tweaked into this kind of badge of honor or even posturing in social movements, right? It turns into this, oh, I got to file. It's, man, I don't know, man. I don't know what you're actually doing. But increasingly, it feels like the net is that wide and the surveillance tools can go that deep that I'm not saying in a way to make people afraid, but I hope people already understand this, how these tools are being used. Now they're being coupled with this AI infrastructure that's being developed and on the military side as well. And to add another element to that, I'll throw out that when the government is talking about anti-fascist as an international threat, one thing I haven't really heard people address is what that means in terms of counterterrorism power, right? Because there's supposed to be this division between the FBI and CIA, between domestic and State Department. They do all the really terrible stuff against the foreigners overseas, but they're supposed to be restricted at home. That line is being blurred and erased. So those more intense surveillance powers that we use abroad are now being used more at home, without a doubt.
Check out Will's website too. There's lots of good stuff there. I was looking at it yesterday as I was prepping for this interview.
Thank you.
And we'll put it in the show notes. Will, it's been real.
Dan, great talking to you guys.
On Union Strong, Wendy Liberator, the president of the Albany Newspaper Guild, joins Darcy Wells and shares stories of some of the hardships currently faced by journalists in the capital of New York.
This is about the Albany Record, and these journalists have been trying to get a contract for close to 20 years. It's crazy, but it's their dedication to reporting local news that's kept them on the job.
For the New York State AFL-CIO, I'm Darcy Wells, and this is Union Strong. For 17 years, the journalists and media workers of the Albany News Guild have been working without a contract. 17 years of reporting the stories that shape their community and delivering the kind of trusted journalism that we need more than ever. Yet they've been doing their jobs without the stability and fair compensation that they deserve. These are the writers behind the Capital Region's newspaper of record, the Times-Union. Today, we're diving into their story, what it means to report the news that so many rely on while facing their own uncertainty, why this contract fight has stretched on for nearly 2 decades, and what's at stake, not just for these journalists, but for the future of local news. My guest is Wendy Liberator, the president of the Albany Newspaper Guild. Wendy, thank you for joining us on the podcast. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So I want to talk about this fight that you're in the middle of and who it is that you represent. As president of the Albany Newspaper Guild, who is it that you represent, the workers there?
We mostly represent all the reporters and all the salespeople in advertising, as well as the few people that are left in circulation in the business office.
And the Times-Union, and I pointed it out in our introduction, is really the paper of record here for the Capital Region. Yes. I mean, you're covering, the State House, the government. You go into Hudson Valley, all the way up into the Adirondacks. So tell me that area that you're covering.
Yes, basically it's from the Adirondacks down south to Putnam County. And we don't go into the Berkshires, but, Warren and Washington County, which often I'm tasked with covering because I'm in the North Country. And, so it's basically up and down the Hudson River from Glens Falls down to through Putnam County.
Okay.
So Yorktown, I guess. Yeah.
And I know, the paper has won many, many awards because of the work that you folks are doing.
Yes.
And I think that people would be surprised to find out, and the reason we're here is because you folks have been without a contract for how long now?
It's been 17 years.
17 years.
Yes. And what happened was in 2008, the company wanted us to get rid of outsourcing, protections that we had for outsourcing and seniority. The union would not budge on that. They called an impasse, and since then, we've been under imposed conditions. Therefore, we haven't had a raise since 2008, contractual raises. And so it's been very difficult with a lot of people are struggling. Many people have left. Many of our best reporters have left the Times Union because
I
of
have
that.
noticed that myself. I've been
Yeah.
a subscriber for many, many, many years, and I've definitely noticed the turnover, which is unfortunate.
Yes, it is. So, and, the people that do stay there are suffering, basically. We have one reporter who's been there for probably 20 years who needs a car. Well, he can't afford a car, so he's taking the bus every day. We have another reporter who got sick and didn't go to the doctor. Even though we have health insurance, we have a high deductible. And she couldn't afford it. There's another woman who's a reporter who can't afford her rent anymore, so she's going to have to move out of the area, which means she's got a huge commute time, and she's concerned about being able to afford gas now. And this is what's happening, and people end up leaving. We have one reporter who just left recently, and, he got a $20,000 bump as a reporter here in the Capitol. It's not, so we're not asking for raises that are unreasonable or not for a living wage for this area.
The reporter that left got the $20,000 bump working for someone else?
Yes,
Okay.
here at the Capitol. And he didn't have to move. He didn't have to, uproot his family. His wife didn't have to quit her job. And this is when we're at the negotiating table now. We did come back in 2022, and they don't want to give us contractual raises. They say what they're paying us is sufficient for this area. Most people are in the mid-50s, and that is not sufficient.
All right. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks, Darcy.
This is Elise Bryant from the Labor Heritage Power Hour. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Next up, the Heartland Labor Forum looks at organizing beyond the workplace. On the bus.
Transit riders in Kansas City are building a bus riders union to demand equitable, accessible public transportation for everyone.
Bus riders of the world unite. I love it.
Doing the job and filled with pride. On the bus. It's on the bus. It's on the bus. It's on the bus. 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 Get on the bus.
As you may have guessed from our introductory song, Get on the Bus, the song is a nostalgic clip of the Minneapolis Metro Public Transportation workers in 1994. The song provides the backdrop music to the film crew, which is showing the diversity and energy it takes to provide public transit in Minneapolis Metro Transit Authority. My name is Chris Mann, and I'll be hosting this segment of the Heartland Labor Forum. Our first guest is Jamie Jackson. She is no stranger to KKFI. She was the co-founder and broadcaster for Understanding Israel and Palestine, a show that's still continuing. And she has researched transit systems which are operating in other United States cities. Cody Sanders is an organizer for the Sunrise Movement. He helped to organize the public bus stop bench building event, which was held there in Kansas City, and we'll talk about that later. Welcome, Jackie and Cody.
Thank you very much.
So glad that you could come.
Thank you.
There's a quote from the first thing we're going to talk about is Bus Riders Union. And there was a quote after the rally that was recently held that people who ride the bus do have power, and we want to bring that power together and make our voices heard. We want to show that buses can serve everyone, not just people who rely on them as a lifeline to get to work. What is your vision, Cody, about the expanded transportation? What's your idea of that?
Yeah, our idea is in a way similar to those private jets: fast, frequent, and safe transportation. The Bus Riders Union vision is a system that serves all of us. It's equitable. It provides that fast, frequent, and safe transportation. We envision a future where public transit is taken by choice, not just a way to get to work or school, but a quality option for events, even just a night out. We hope that through our work, we can achieve a world-class transportation system right here in Kansas City.
Awesome. Jamie, what will expanding transit do for our community as a whole?
Well, it does a lot more than people know. It helps businesses attract workers from a greater area. The bus system works better. It reduces traffic, and it minimizes the concrete that we have to put in for parking lots. And yeah, it's something that is for the good of all of the citizens of the community, not just the people who can't afford cars.
Is the idea of forming a bus riders union a new idea, or has this appeared in other cities? And then Cody, can you also talk about the bench building event that you had?
Absolutely. No, this is not a new idea. Transit riders have been unionizing for decades. Using people power to demand freedom of mobility is definitely not a new idea. The Los Angeles Bus Riders Union was formed in 1994, and since then has saved the city's transit countless times. The idea of transit riders unionizing has historical precedent nationwide, as seen everywhere from St. Louis to Pittsburgh and Seattle. The bench building, fundraising, and dropping campaign was a lot of fun to organize. We identified a need in our community for a dignified place to wait for the bus, a comfortable place to wait, because we have long wait times in Kansas City. The thoughtful leadership of the Sunrise Movement and eventually the Bus Riders Union as well put together a great plan for having a really fun event, a party, to raise money for the materials. We went and gathered the materials and put out our feelers for the community. Where can we build these benches? Where can we gather almost 200 people to get together to use our hands to do something good for the people as they're waiting for the bus?
So thanks to Cody Sanders and Jamie Jackson, and as ever, listeners, thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me.
And ride the bus.
Ride the bus.
Hey y'all, Adam Keller here from the Valley Labor Report. We're proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speak. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
On the Union Bug, workers explore how to build unions that reflect their own values and vision.
Author Daniel Gross lays out a framework for worker-led organizing and why there's no one-size-fits-all model.
You know, I am super excited to see Mel back with the Union Bug. She had to take a break for a little while, and she is back, and she is having some great conversations with people.
Welcome, everyone, to another episode of The Union Bug, a podcast by workers for workers. My name is Mel Buer, and I'm your host. On the show this week is Daniel Gross to talk about his forthcoming book, Unions of Our Own, 8 Building Blocks to Change Work and the World. The book provides a, quote, radical step-by-step framework for workers who want to fight for the better workplaces they've always envisioned and dream of bigger changes too. You know, I think there is a lot of, I mean, I could pull up surveys from the last 5 years of workers in both the private and unorganized areas of the public sector who are wanting to join a union, right? And either the resources aren't there or the interest isn't there or they don't know where to start. You know, there's this giant gulf between the individuals who are coming together on the shop floor in whatever workplace they're in and feeling like they could potentially organize something and then being able to actually find the people who can help them organize, right?
No, I'm resonating 100% with what you're saying. One of the contributions, I hope, of the book is to kind of help us work through. So, you know, there's so many visionary, value-oriented folks in the working class, right? That are, you know, the union has done this and this union, how could they be promoting AI and this union censored this and, you know, all these things. And it's frustrating. What the book tries to point out is what are the structural, to use that kind of big term, what are the structural and material or financial realities that push that stuff? And on the broadest level, one of the arguments is that our union model that we choose is highly influential to the kind of vision we'll be able to express, right? And so, yeah, the book is a kind of tour through these 8 building blocks, not a tour just to check them out, but to set up a context where workers can discuss, ultimately debate, you know, align, and kind of take a first draft position. Hey, what are we going to do in this block? And then ultimately figure this stuff out through struggle, through experimentation. There's a tool in the book as well about experimentation. See if what we think is going to happen is going to happen. Maybe it won't. And then we just change it, right? Basic stuff. But a lot of times in campaigns, we kind of bang our head against the wall because we just got knocked on more doors. And, you know, and all of a sudden years have gone by and we're still knocking on the door. So this has an experimental framework. But yeah, what I've found is really there's kind of 2 sets within the 8, right? So there's the first 4 building blocks. I call them in Unions of Our Own, the foundational building blocks, right? It starts with defining our constituency. Who is our union of, by, and for? And then move then to what type of union are we going to build? This is definitely going to be one of the more controversial parts of the book, in that I'm saying that there's kind of 2 left. The first choice really in union type is between traditional unionism and solidarity unionism, right? We're not going to have time to go into all that. There's, of course, many different kinds of traditional unionism and certain kinds of solidarity unionism. But I'm saying that's the threshold, in that that's going to lay out the, again, stupid word, structural kind of financial vision, reality of the union is going to start there. Then you can have class struggle union, you could have social movement union, you can have open source. There's so many unionisms, right? But I'm just saying, workers have the unique wisdom and the right to work through this question, to take that away and say, this is above the pay grade. Your job is to bring your coworkers into a committee or cards, and it's to get in the union, not decide what kind of union it's going to be. I fundamentally am against that philosophically, and I just don't think it's the way that we win. And I think there's 100 years almost now of a record that is in accord there. So then the final foundational building block, we all love this, right? Labor nerds, we love strategy. You know, you get to the bar after the picket line, and someone says strategy, everyone's eyes light up. But strategy is the 800-pound gorilla in unionism. The book offers a framework. There's no cookie cutter here. There's no method. If we just follow it really well, we're going to have powerful unionism. Like, I just fundamentally think that's wrong, that there's just this already a method and you learn it really well. It's a kind of a technocratic exercise. No, So this is a framework that workers who know their industry, they're humans outside of work with knowledge, right? And then just by virtue of organic ties that already exist out there, figure out a strategy, bring in the research component as well. That's not the most innovative thing in the book. I think many believe we have to have the research part. And then I bring in the labor strategy canon, saying, look, use your own thinking using a couple strategy frameworks that I offer. Do the research, and I'm totally against the opposite of cookie cutter unionism, which is blank slate. Like, we're gonna start from first principles and we're gonna do all the thing. I'm like, our forebears, they have figured out some stuff real good. Like, this is validated stuff, right? Doesn't mean you could just take it off the shelf and use it, but you need to at least pick it up off the shelf and consider whether it inspires you. So I have a labor strategy canon that, I mean, I'll tell you, if you're thinking about, getting into unionism at your employer and other stuff in the book doesn't resonate, like this canon, this is going to make you more powerful against your boss.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.
I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
Once again, Daniel's book, Unions of Our Own, 8 Building Blocks to Change Work and the World, will be out from Haymarket Books on April 28th. Be sure to pre-order. That's it for us here at the Union Bug this week. Once again, I'm your host, Mel Buer. Thanks again for your continued support and solidarity.
Hi, this is Michael Funky from the Radical Songbook on PirateButteRadio.com. I'm proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with over 200 radio shows and podcasts across the country and around the world. Tune in, laborradionetwork.org. Power to the workers and their union.
Next up, from LaborStart. They're taking a global look at one of the fastest growing threats to workers, extreme heat.
And the takeaway is clear. The stronger the union, the safer and cooler the workplace.
And by cooler, I think, Scott, you mean cooler,
right?
I think it works both ways, right? Cooler and cooler.
Let me reach into the cooler and see what I got in here.
Like James Dean.
Hello, this is Eric Lee, and this is another LaborStart podcast where we interview trade union activists and leaders from around the world. And this week, our guest is an old friend of mine, Sterling Smith. Sterling, introduce yourself. Tell our listeners who you are.
Morning, Eric. I'm basically a trade union trainer. So I started off training shop stewards and safety representatives here in the UK, and then I've done that in about 50 countries all over the world.
And we've known each other for coming up in 3 decades now. Sterling, Sterling has done amazing work. Now, we're going to talk today about heat, extreme heat, and workers and work. So can you tell me, is this a very serious problem?
Well, Eric, according to the International Labour Organization that listeners will know about from previous podcasts, the United Nations agency dedicated to these issues, 70% of the world's working population are exposed to excessive heat. That's 2.41 billion workers worldwide.
Okay. And is this problem, I'm guessing, is getting worse?
It's getting worse, and it will get worse. If you look at some of the forward projections, you can see that in many cities in what's called the garment-producing belt, India, Bangladesh, Thailand, Indonesia, that sort of area, some of those cities like Dhaka will experience more than 100 days a year at a temperature of 35 Celsius. So that problem is only going to get worse, and it affects workers in every continent, I guess, apart from Antarctica. Even in Europe, in fact, the problem is getting worse faster in Europe than any other continent.
That's very interesting. And this is also linked to humidity, right? Because if it's more humid, it's even worse.
Yes. As temperature rises, the capacity of the air to hold water vapor goes up. So the humidity, what people talk about is, it's supposed to be X, but it feels like X plus 10, if you get what I mean. And that's the humidity effect. And we can talk about how the body tries to protect itself.
So why don't we talk about now, why is this harmful for workers? What happens to the human body?
Okay, so the core temperature, what's called the vital organs, if you like, in the human body, are usually at an average of 37 degrees.
Right.
Anything above that starts to indicate a problem. So when you go to the doctor, she or he always takes your temperature. That's almost the first things they do. So once you get even quite a small increase, you start to feel unwell. So when you get to above 40, like it's dangerous. It's dangerous. The body is not coping. And that's when you get, it's heat stress, as we call it, when the body can't cope with excess temperature. And the ultimate issue is heat stroke, literally when people just collapse and they can't get up and they can't function. But before then, there's dizziness, there's all sorts of other things that can happen, which I can talk about. And these are not just short-term effects, these are long-term. Kidney damage, brain damage.
Is there actually a risk to human life from heat?
Yes. Oh, yeah.
You can die from being too hot.
Heat stroke kills, depending on the circumstances, between 20 and 60% mortality rate of heat stroke. And that's huge.
Right.
20 to 60% mortality rate with heat stroke cases. And even if you recover, you'll almost certainly have brain damage, kidney damage, stuff like that.
So you've already mentioned the British TUC as a proposal, and the European Trade Union Confederation is working on this. But you mentioned in an email to me about Cambodia.
Yeah.
So walk us through that. What's happening there?
Well, it's interesting. There's some very good people at Royal Holloway College in London who've done some really detailed work looking at workers in Cambodia across about 3 different sectors. One of which is outdoor, because obviously outdoor workers, whether they're in the informal economy or whether in plantations or construction, are generally going to be, well, they could be at more risk because there's no possibility of shade, for example, or fans. But they looked at garment workers as well. And what they found was that workers in a union spent 50% less time in hot conditions. Or as I say, the stronger the union, the cooler the workplace. And it's like, indeed, any other health and safety issue, or any issue at all, when the union gets involved, the outcomes get better for workers. And we know generally across the board that when the unions are involved, accidents go down 50%. So it's the same with heat. Union gets involved, gets stuck in, negotiates with the employer, has a collective bargaining agreement. And there are some examples now coming out, then things get better for workers.
And the slogan, we both know, has a bit of a history, right? What was the slogan back in the 90s that we were promoting?
We were talking about the big campaign for the ILO Convention on Occupational Safety and Health in Mines. And we said the stronger the union, the safer the mine.
Right. And it was a fantastic poster illustrating that, which probably should be done now for this. But it seems that you've made a broader principle of this. It's not just occupational safety and health. It's basically, if there's a union, begins to solve problems for workers. It's the first step, right?
Yeah, and I always say employers benefit. If the union is there speaking for workers, it helps the employer. And we should mention the productivity question. Workers' productivity dramatically declines as the temperature goes up. So in fact, employers would benefit from looking at this issue because they'd find productivity would improve or wouldn't get worse. And there's case studies about this. There's a brilliant case study of a brick kiln in India where the productivity was going down and the employer produced, just cold water and better breaks. The productivity went up and all the other brick kiln owners copied him. Right. So, it actually will benefit the employer if they only had the sense to see it.
That's a sad commentary on capitalism that we have keeping your workers alive is actually good for business.
Yes.
But Sterling, thank you so much. An informative and interesting conversation, as I expected.
It's a pleasure, Eric. And don't forget, people, the stronger the union, the cooler the workplace.
Indeed.
Hey, this is Carmen Rodriguez from El Cafecito del Día. At LACLA, we are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network with more than 200 labor radio shows and podcasts from across the country and around the world. The Labor Radio Podcast Network, where working people speaks. Find us at laborradionetwork.org.
Finally, Organizing for Change reminds us that building worker power isn't mechanical, it's creative.
It's interesting. We brought up the idea of a one-size-fits-all model not being optimal, and listeners will find that both authors come to similar conclusions, but from quite different places and quite different perspectives on that. So it's quite an interesting comparison.
And one of the cool things about Organizing for a Change is it is a British show. And work labor laws, they're a little bit different in the UK. The fundamentals are the same. It is all about worker. It is all about workers talking to workers and organizing for a change.
So hello listeners and welcome to Organising for a Change, the podcast for union builders with me, Simon Sapper.
And me, Martin Smith.
And we're delighted to have two very esteemed guests, and I do mean that sincerely. Esteemed guests. We've got Jane Holgate and John Page, who are authors of Changemakers, Radical Strategies for Social Movement Organising. Of course, they're not just authors of that book. They have a long and distinguished record of contribution to researching labour movement stuff. But you're both very welcome to the podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for the invite.
As I say, you're both very welcome. Your book sets out very clearly the challenges in the landscape that union builders and those who wish to organise and mobilise in progressive causes face, and offers some really helpful insights about how to understand that. But given that description, when it comes to actually taking that information and using it to build, is it fair to say that organising is more of an art than a science?
I think it is. I think organising is always a challenge. It doesn't matter how long you've been an organiser and how much you've organised in different spaces. I think every time there are different challenges thrown up because nothing stays the same in life or society. We're always operating in different sort of social, political and economic contexts. Within also within structures within our organisations as well. And I think each of those factors always provides a different challenge at that particular time. So I think what we tried to do with the book is to ensure that it wasn't a this is the way to organise book. It was a this is the way to think about organising.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting that some people believe there are blueprints, and not just in the trade union movement, but in the wider organising. Here's a model, these are the steps, take them one at a time, tick them off, etc. The reality is, I think organising is a far more creative, almost a playful thing, where you have to experiment, try things out and see what happens. The other thing I would say about union organising, having been a union organiser in various roles over a number of years, there's a challenge because one of the key things we say in the book is this distinction between organising from above and organising from below. Powerful, transformative organising involves transforming people so that they discover their agency and they act to change. Now, the trouble with trade unions is they're very often hierarchical, and the idea that people at the base can be making some of the decisions can be quite challenging. So I remember I worked as an organiser at one union, which I won't name, and I kept getting praise from my boss, going, "Oh, it's brilliant, what you're doing so." And then one day, unfortunately, he asked me what I'd been doing that had got such great results. And I told him, he said, "Can you just take your foot off the pedal for a while? Because we don't want to upset the employer." So I think one of the challenges for union organisers is to navigate those contradictions that exist within organisations, but are particularly acute, I think, in trade union organising.
Yeah, you've absolutely deduced where I was going to with that question, which was there's not a checklist, is there? It's very tempting to say, that's great, now where's the checklist? And I've known organisers who literally have said that, but it doesn't work that way, does it?
I wonder whether you might want to talk a little bit more about spiders and starfish or any other animals you might want to talk about.
Can I just say one thing first? I think one of the challenges we have in talking about baggage is that back in the 90s, trade union leaders were sold the organising model on the basis your membership is declining, it's organise or die. And if you remember, Martin, the scary graph which showed the age of union members and so on, and it was sold as a economic response. We can put more members on and then your union won't get bust. Now, the problem with that was that the experience of ordinary shop stewards was organising became mature that they were expected to do without any clear understanding how it was going to change their experience or build power in their workplace. There's all sorts of problems in the way it was sold and the way it was managed and so on. I suppose I should try and explain the starfish and the spider analogy
go
to
ahead, yeah.
anyone who's not read the book. It's a very simple concept. I don't know why it took a book to convey it, but basically, if you pull off a leg of a spider, the leg dies, and if you pull off too many legs off, the spider dies. It's got a central nervous system that controls it. But a starfish, if you chop a leg off a starfish, it will grow. The leg will grow a new starfish, and the starfish will grow a new leg. And so the distinction in terms of organizations is whether or not effectively they're decentralized, have the power to regenerate at the base, and so on. And clearly, trade unions are not starfish organizations. But when you look at branches, particularly larger branches, say, for example, in the public sector where you might have 3,000 members or something like that, actually, the way the branch is organized and the degree to which it cedes control to members is really important. And Marshall Gaines has this expression, if you want to build power, you need to cede control. And I think it's really important to understand anything that's tightly controlled from the center is never going to allow the space for the creativity from which new ideas and new models and new change comes.
Yeah, there's Jane Holgate, John Page, Changemakers, Radical Strategies for Social Movement Organising is available from Bristol University Press. So thank you both very much indeed, and we'll see you next time on the next Organising for Change. Bye now.
Now it's time for our speed round, shows you should know, where we highlight some more of the great work that's happening across the Labor Radio Podcast Network.
Over on Stick Together, the Retail and Fast Food Workers Union's Josh Cullinan discusses Australia's Fair Work Commission scrapping junior rates of pay and how the system continues to be rigged against young workers.
On work stoppage, Lena and Dan talk about 30,000 New York City building workers nearly going on strike, break down signs that the economy just isn't working, and celebrate major contract wins for LA educators.
The Mind Wars Forum features Sassa Wilkes in a conversation on Appalachian identity, storytelling, and the creative process.
And on The Wealthy Iron Worker, Rusty investigates how OSHA allowed Phoenix Lumber, dubbed the deadliest workplace in America, to keep operating despite multiple deaths and serious violations.
On the SAG-AFTRA podcast, Alicia Rodas joins Duncan Crabtree Ireland to explain what intimacy coordinators do and why their first union contract matters for performers across the industry.
And folks, that is a wrap for this week's Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, your roundup from more than 200 shows in the Labor Radio Podcast Network.
Getting close to 250.
Find links to every show at laborradionetwork.org and follow our hashtag LaborRadioPod on social media.
And hey, tell us what you think. Email us at info@laborradionetwork.org.
If you don't own enough t-shirts already, then support the network with a union-made t-shirt. 2 colors, all sizes, at laborradionetwork.org.
And hey, if you're headed to Chicago for Labor Notes, it'd be great to see you walking around in a Labor Radio Podcast Network t-shirt. You're going to see us wearing them.
Guess I better put mine in the wash then.
Nah, come as you are. Come as you are. As always, this podcast is recorded under a SAG-AFTRA collective bargaining agreement.
This show is produced by Chris Garlock, Patrick Dixon, and me, Harold Phillips. And hey, a special thanks to you, Scott Parkin, for joining us today as co-host.
Thanks for having me. I didn't know if I was supposed to go off script there or not. Sorry.
We assumed that people are just going to go off script at will. So, yeah. For the Labor Radio Podcast Weekly, I'm Chris Garlock. Stay active.
Stay tuned
to your local Labor Radio Podcast show.
And we'll see you all next week.